When a child learns to ride his bike without training wheels, it's an exciting time. They have a little more freedom and they can go a little bit faster. But there can also be some fear. In the past, they had the security of those training wheels, and perhaps their parents were right there with them, encouraging them. But now that security's gone, and their parents just watch as their child disappears in the distance. Well, we find something similar in the spiritual life. At the beginning, we can receive a lot of consolations and feel very close to God. But all of this changes when God takes away the training wheels, or when He withdraws His consolation from us and that sense of His presence and love. God does this in a certain sense because He trusts us, but then He's also giving us the opportunity to grow much faster in the spiritual life than if we were always receiving consolation. I imagine the disciples in the gospel, they probably felt a little bit like this. They had been with Jesus for so long, and this time that they had with Him was a time of instruction and comfort. But now Jesus, He was preparing for His passion and His eventual departure from them. He encourages the disciples and gives them some direction when He says that I am the way, the truth, and the life. This departure, though, it was almost like removing the training wheels. It was a moment for the disciples to grow and trust in Jesus more. And we know that they didn't fully learn this lesson until after the resurrection. And this is clear during the Passion because when Jesus died, there was only one disciple at the foot of the cross with Mary. Well, Jesus' departure, it teaches us that we can't live our lives entirely in comfort. There's lessons to be learned from the lack of sweetness in the spiritual life. The idea is that God works to transform the soul from its need for this sweetness and consolation to a more mature faith. And He helps the soul go from infancy to adulthood. Now, we usually don't like this change. It can almost be like a child. When a child doesn't get what they want, they kick, they scream, they cry, they make all kinds of noise. And they even do this when their parents are taking something away from them that could be for their good. Well, the disciples throughout the Gospels, they were like this at times. For example, the time when Jesus predicted His passion and Peter spoke against Him. And in our Gospel today, the disciples, they were worried. There was panic and fear to the point that Jesus had to tell them, do not let your hearts be troubled. They didn't realize that His departure was for their good. Well, brothers and sisters, we all experience moments in our spiritual lives when there's no consolation. And this can cause fear because it can seem that we're far from God. But God knows what medicine's appropriate for our growth in the spiritual life. It's possible that those moments without consolation are moments when God removes the training wheels so that we can grow a little bit more. In the second reading, Peter, he spoke about stones. And if you think about a stone sitting outside, there's no life in it. It just remains in one place, and it's cold and lifeless. Well, something that we have to be on guard against is becoming cold and lifeless like this stone. This happens when we live in sin. It also happens when we live lukewarm lives, or when we become complacent and stop moving forward in the spiritual life. In St. Teresa of Avila's book, The Interior Castle, she talked about the interior journey of the soul to God. And she described this journey with 7 mansions or rooms that we have to pass through in order to reach the most interior one where God is. And her complaint was that souls, they start off well, they grow in virtue, and they no longer commit any serious sins. But many souls, they get stuck. They become stagnant and they become comfortable in a well-ordered life. They think that there's no more progress to be made. But in the spiritual life, there's always more progress to be made. According to the second reading, we're not meant to be those ordinary stones, but we're meant to be living stones. These stones are united to Christ. They make up the body of Christ, and they're filled with His life. To be these stones, Christ has to be the foundation of our lives. And when He is, we're transformed into these living stones and we take on new qualities, like being firm and unshakable in the faith. In the early stages of the spiritual life, none of us are like this. We scare easily. Remember, all but one disciple remained at the foot of the cross. But little by little, once God removed their training wheels, they grew strong in their faith to the extent that almost all the disciples were martyred for the faith. Well, all of us can reach this point where we're ready to offer our lives for the faith, but it requires that we trust in God. The disciples, they didn't have this trust until much later. They first needed to go through the passion and death of Jesus. They needed to be separated from the comfort and good feelings in order to grow in the spiritual life. And we know there was fear, there was kicking, screaming, and crying, but ultimately, God's medicine, it worked. Well, to reach this level of maturity, it's a process that makes us firm and unshakable in the faith. And it's important that we all go through this process and become steadfast in our faith, because when we live out the church's mission, which is to evangelize or share our faith with others, we're guaranteed to encounter difficulties. We'll run into obstacles and we'll encounter people and circumstances that will challenge our faith. But when we understand God's ways, we learn to accept the trials and difficulties. In the spiritual life, we're not meant to be infants our whole lives and to always enjoy sweetness and consolation. We're all meant to grow and mature in the faith, which at times requires that things be taken away from us. But through this process, God forms us into living stones, with Christ as our foundation. He makes us firm and steadfast in the faith, and then our very existence becomes for the praise and glory of God.